Hey everyone! Welcome to the 6th episode of my Stretch Your Stamps scrapbooking video series. This month, I'm joined by my friends Alice Bull from the Scrap Happy community, Loredana Bucaria, and Janet Fritz, and we're going to share our favorite ways to use background stamps. Because it's the new year, and because it's been half a year since I started this video series, I do have some announcements to make and a giveaway, and that will be posted on both my YouTube channel and my Instagram profile tomorrow morning, so make sure you're subscribed to my channel and you turn on the notifications to get alerts when that video goes live. Now, before I dive into this month's video, here are some projects that were shared over on Instagram using the hashtag #SYSScrapbooking over the last 2 months. Marisol Benitez was one of my guest contributors for our last episode featuring small sentiment stamps. And in her video, she shared a variety of different ways to use some small sentiment stamps from Ellie Edwards in her pocket memory keeping projects. I just love all the different DIY pocket cards that she managed to create with her stamps. Daisy Scraps was another one of my guest contributors, and I love how she used a variety of different small sentiment stamps to fill in a stenciled area to create this bold and bright and colorful title for her spread. Monique Lowe, aka Handmade Happy by Monique, was my last guest contributor for last month's video, and I just think it was so magical the way she used some small sentiment stamps from Ellie's studio to make stamped impressions into her mixed media pops of color background. For my contributions last episode, I used some small sentiment stamps from the Sassy Club to fill up some labels for my Everyday Explorers mini book. Then I used some more small sentiment stamps from Citrus Twist Kits to create clusters on my background for my Life Crafted layout. Make sure to check out all these videos in my Stretch Your Stamps scrapbooking playlist if you missed any in November. Tiffany shared this gorgeous layout that she made using a variety of different fonts for her title, including some fussy cut stamping, and I just loved the combination of the different fonts on her layout here. Linny B really knocked it out of the park last month with some stamping inspiration on Instagram, and I especially loved the custom stamped background that she created for her October daily using her alphabet stamps, and the custom gift wrapping paper that she created with some repeat stamping. Audrey Med shared this beautiful layout in her December daily that she created with some poinsettia stamps from Ellie Edwards. And during November and December, I also shared a bunch of December daily related Stretch Your Stamps videos as well. And I also decided to share this ink comparison on Instagram between 4 different types of inks that I have. And there are some close-ups of all 4 inked backgrounds on my Instagram page if you're interested in seeing those differences up close for yourself. Just a reminder that if you'd like to share some layouts on Instagram inspired by our Stretch Your Stamps videos, make sure to use the hashtag #SYSScrapbooking on Instagram, and I'll pick out a few to feature in my video next month. One of my favorite ways to use background stamps is for a stamped kissing technique that I demonstrated in my Stretch Your Stamps video featuring large sentiment stamps. So if you haven't already checked that one out, I'll leave a link down in the description box below. In today's video, I'm going to be working in my Life Crafted album, and in both my layouts, I'm going to share different ways to stretch your small background stamps to create backgrounds for your larger size pages. And because most background stamps that I've seen are sized at approximately 4.5 inches wide by 5 3/4 inches tall to be used on an A2 size card front, I think it's really important before buying background stamps to think of different ways that you can use them on larger size pages, like 5x8 or 6x8 or even larger than that. In my first example, I'm starting off with the Hero Arts Magical Background stamp, and I'm going to be doing some heat embossing and ink smooshing to create a custom background for my layout. I'm starting out with some white cardstock cut at 4.25 inches wide by 5.5 inches tall. That's the same size as an A2 size card front. And I'm swiping over the surface of my cardstock with an anti-static embossing powder tool. This just gets rid of any static or moisture on the cardstock that might attract any stray embossing powders. And it gives a cleaner finish when you're doing any heat embossing. Next, I'm inking up my background stamp with Versamark ink and stamping that down onto my white cardstock. For this specific technique, if you don't have a stamping block that's large enough to hold your background stamp, feel free to just leave it lying face up on the table and then press your white cardstock onto the stamp like I'm doing here. After that, I'm sprinkling on some white embossing powder, and it's going to stick only onto the areas where I've stamped with the Versamark ink. Then I'm heating this up with my heat gun until all the embossing powder melts. And because this is white embossing powder on white cardstock, it's going to be a bit hard to see until I add some ink. I'm using the Distress ink colors in Stormy Sky and Chipped Sapphire to go with my photos. And I'm going to do some ink smooshing. So I'm just smooshing my ink pads onto my Silicone Craft Mat. Any non-stick surface will do, like if you have laminated surfaces, etc. And I'm spraying this with some water until I can see the ink start to bead up on my craft mat. Then I'm taking my embossed cardstock and swiping it through the ink. And you can see that the areas where I've embossed will resist the ink so that my stamped areas stay nice and white and the ink gets picked up everywhere else. Now, usually after I do ink smooshing, I'll use my heat gun to dry my inked panels, but because I've done some embossing on this cardstock, I don't want to heat up my cardstock any more than I have to because you can actually overheat your embossing. So I'm going to set this aside to air dry before moving on. Now, I love the texture that this ink smooshing gives to my background, but there are some areas that didn't get any ink, so I'm just using my ink blending brush. These are from Tailored Expressions, and I'm inking up the white spots on my background with the Chipped Sapphire ink, just to make sure that I've covered all the white areas. So my idea with this inked background is to cut the background into strips of varying lengths and widths, and create floating strips of blue on this black piece of cardstock to document our trip to the Van Gogh exhibit. The first room that you enter into this exhibit is a hall of all these floating signs in a black room. So I thought this would be kind of reminiscent of that experience, to have all of these strips of blue hanging on this black canvas here. So you'll see that I've cut my background down to strips ranging from 3/4 inches tall to 1¼ inches tall. And I'm going to back them onto some white cardstock to make them stand out a bit more on my black background. I also have 2 small photos that I've printed out, and I'm just playing around with the placement of these with the background strips on my page. Once I was satisfied with the placement of all my background strips, I glued everything down with my Tombow Mono permanent adhesive tape printer. And next I'm moving on to the right side of my layout, which is going to be a simple fold out to reveal a large photo that I took in that exhibit. This front panel here looks like some pattern paper, but it's actually a photo that I took of one of the projection screens in the exhibit that showed off all of the little details of the brushstrokes of Van Gogh's paintings. And I just printed that on some white cardstock to slightly wider than a Life Crafted album page. To make my flip out, I cut my photo down so that the left piece is 5 inches wide and the right piece is 4 3/8 inches wide. And I'm scoring this front panel, which is the blue kind of pattern paper. I'm scoring that at 4 3/8 inches so that when I fold along that score mark, that gives me a hinge that I can then use to attach these 2 fold out pieces together. And I just find that scoring the cardstock is easier than scoring on the photo paper. So that's why I created the fold in my cardstock rather than the photo. So I just applied some 3/8 inch score tape along that edge to create an attachment for my hinge onto the back of my photo. And just adhering this down, making sure everything is nice and lined up. And finally, I'm attaching the other half of my photo on the inside of this flap. To to finish this spread off, I'm using some gold puffy alphabet stickers from Citrus Twist Kits to spell out my title on the front of this flip out. I decorated the front panel with some gold star stickers from the Citrus Twist Kits Merry and Bright collection, and I added some black word phrase stickers also from Citrus Twist Kits along the edge of my flip out to serve as kind of like a tab to flip this page open. This stamping idea is kind of abstract, and I was almost going to scrap this idea and not share it, but the more I thought about it, the more I felt like it can be used in so many different ways, depending on what type of background stamp you use, what colors you use on top of the white embossing, and even the color of the cardstock you use for your base. And the heat embossing is really what makes this stand out compared to just using like pattern paper as your background, for example. For my second layout, I'm sharing how I used repeat stamping with a background stamp to create a geometric pattern on my layout, and the stamp I'm using is the wood grain stamp from Tim Holtz and Stampers Anonymous. To get started, I've printed out a diamond-shaped photo approximately 4 inches tall by 3 inches wide, and this is going to be the focal point for the left side of my layout where I'm doing the stamping. My plan is to place this photo in the center of my page and use the background stamp to stamp around this photo. Because I wanted my photo to be centered in the portion of my Life Crafted album page without worrying about the holes, I cut my base page at 4¼ inch wide instead of the usual 5 inches. And I'm going to be attaching some pattern paper on the right side later on to put this into my album. I'm using my Tim Holtz design ruler to find the center of this page, and I'm going to use my Tombow Mono repositionable tape runner to temporarily adhere my photo right down in the middle. Then I'm going to stamp this background stamp once along each of the edges of this photo. And to do this, you do actually need to have a stamp block that's large enough to hold your rubber stamp here. And the ink that I'm using is the Gathered Twigs Distress ink. Now, I don't usually use distress inks with my stamps because I find the ink tends to bead up on my clear stamps and my images tend to be blotchy. But rubber stamps actually take the inks a bit differently, and I find that even distress inks stamp really clearly with my rubber stamps. And also the distress inks are just a bit bigger of an ink pad than my mini ink cubes, and so it doesn't take as long to ink up this large background stamp. You'll notice as well that the stamped image does overlap in 4 of the places along the edges of this panel here. And I think it provides a really cool effect where the wood grain overlaps. And this pattern is even more well defined if you use like a more solid stamped background instead of like this sparse looking wood grain here. Once I'm done with that, I get this really cool geometric wood grain pattern that fits my photo just perfectly. I decided to mat my photo onto some white cardstock so that it stands out a bit more on this wood grain background. So I just adhered my photo down to some white cardstock, and then I trimmed off the edges, leaving about 1/8 inch border around the photo. And now I'm moving on to the right side of my layout. So this spread is documenting our family trip out to Granville Island, and it's a really funny story about watching some very gutsy seagulls swipe a whole container of fries away from a family who was eating outside. So I decided to use some pattern papers and embellishments from Citrus Twist Kits Flea Market Findings collection that was released back in October of last year. And that collection has some pattern papers and a chipboard sticker that has birds in it, which I thought would go perfectly with my seagull story. So I cut down some of the blue and yellow pattern papers to go behind my Instax sized photos there. And I also cut an extra yellow strip to go behind my wood grain stamped background. And this is where I'm going to be punching the holes to put this page into my album. To make sure that my finished page is going to be the same size as a Life Crafted album page protector, I'm temporarily adhering my pieces down onto one of these page protectors as I'm adhering the pieces together. And I'm doing something similar for the right side of my layout as well. Because these pattern papers are only 8 inches tall and the full height of the page protector is 8 3/8 of an inch tall, I did have to piece together some of the extra blue pattern paper on the very top and bottom edges of that yellow strip of pattern paper to make up for that full height there. And that just helps draw the colors across to the left side of the page as well to make my layout a bit more cohesive across the 2 pages. Just adhering down my photos onto the pattern paper. For the bottom right photo on the right side of my page, I'm going to create a little flip out to hold some journaling. And to do that, I'm just folding one of these 3x4 pocket cards in half, then attaching the photo on the front of that flap, and adhering a small 2x3 journaling card to the inside of that flap. I think that was one of the cut aparts that came on the 6x8 pattern paper pack. I'm going to add my journaling with some clear sticker paper onto that later on. As for the finishing touches to this spread, I'm just diving through the ephemera pieces that came in this flea market findings kit to form an embellishment cluster at the bottom of this wood grain page. And I'm also using a few other ephemera bits and word phrase stickers to decorate the bottoms of these photos as well. Of course, I just had to include this chipboard sticker that had a bird on it, and then another chipboard sticker that says hello for the top of my right page there. I hope you enjoyed those tips and tricks for using background stamps in your scrapbooking projects. I would love to see what you create with background stamps as well. So don't forget to use the hashtag #SYSScrapbooking on Instagram if you decide to try out any of the techniques shown in this video or any of the techniques in Alice, Loredana, and Janet's videos. I'll be sharing new episodes for my Stretch Your Stamps scrapbooking video series on the second Saturday of each month with different guest contributors every month. So make sure you're subscribed to my YouTube channel for more stamping inspiration. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments down below, and make sure to hit the like button if you enjoyed this video. Thanks so much for watching!